And welcome to the Diablo podcast, your home for Diablo diehards, tryhards, casual, and hardcore alike. I am your host, Xanth, and today I'm not joined by my regular crew. Nerwords and Nineball are off living life. Um, but we got something pretty cool. We got two of my favorite creators, two experts in their respective fields to kind of come on in and give us some insight around the PTR. So first, we got MacroBioBoi.
Hi, everybody. I'm that guy.
And we got LuckyLuciano.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be on this is my second podcast with you guys, and I always have a good time. But yeah, looking forward to the chat today.
And thanks for coming on because I want to stop, and we didn't pre-show this. Uh, both of you guys have done some really cool things as of late. So I mean, just take a moment and celebrate yourselves. What cool stuff has been happening to you guys?
I went and got banana ice cream with Nutella on it for the first time ever. I don't know if anybody else has ever had banana ice cream. But no, I mean, gotten some really cool opportunities. Obviously, everybody just got done with the PTR. That is insane. Season 6 will be crazy. Got to get stuck in Seattle during the whole cloud strike issue. 24 hours in the Seattle airport. I don't recommend it. But got to play a Spiritborn class, go to meet a lot of the devs, and I'm just like I'm chomping at the bit, waiting to get to October 8th, basically.
And Lucky, since the last time that you've been on,
Yeah, so I was invited out to Blizzard headquarters to test the Spiritborn class, and I had to unfortunately decline. But the upside of that was that it was because I was welcoming into the world my first child. I couldn't make it because we were too close to our due date. I am now a father. I heard from Diablo players that apparently, you have to have 17 kids to play the game at, the optimal capacity, and I figured there was something to it, so I had to give it a shot, and got the little guy sleeping right next to me, sleeping like a baby. Really excited to eventually get my hands on the Spiritborn class and blast some, Vessel of Hatred, and we just finished up the PTR, so that was a lot of fun.
what a good dad and obviously a good partner as well to be like, you know what, this awesome opportunity that I'm excited for, I will forego so that I can
There's always
witness
more
the birth of
opportunities.
my
It's
child.
great.
Yeah, there'll be more. Um, I believe also in the time since we last saw, you hit 100K on YouTube. That's kind of a big deal.
I got the thing back there. Yeah.
You got the button.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. There's
let me
the
see
button.
it. There it is.
Yeah.
Macro
It's right.
and macro is creeping as well. I know you're getting there.
Creeping.
Hasn't hit it
Um,
Creeping,
yet.
creeping.
He's well overdue. For sure. Mac is like one of the first Diablo content creators. We go back like to Diablo 2 days, and was always a big fan of Mac. I was watching macro streams before I even started streaming myself. Like it was always like a mentor to me and one of the best creators out there, guys. If you're listening to this and you haven't subbed to Mac, please do it. But yeah, I made a joke on Twitter. I had the picture of the plaque and the ultrasound, and I hadn't told anybody like at work about. They don't know that I do the content creation. They didn't know that I was having a kid yet, and I was like, I have all these things I want to share with the world, but where can I do it? Twitter felt like the safest place, or X, whatever. But
we still
yeah,
call it Twitter. It's fine.
yeah, some fun stuff going on.
So it is really cool to have both of you guys here. Because like I said, you're doing great things. But this podcast isn't devoted to just talking about how awesome you are. Go sub to them, obviously. It's to talk about the PTR. What I would argue probably the most massive PTR we've ever had. Um, One that is fundamentally changing the game. Uh, it's not just items. It's everything. And it feels weird. I have a lot of mixed feelings. I think a lot of people have a lot of mixed feelings about this because we've played this game in its current iteration for so long. To have everything upended um, is jarring. Now, the first thing I have to ask everybody, when I booted up the PTR, I had to update my drivers, and the game just looked nicer. Did it?
It kind of looked like, and I do not have like nice screens. I'm running on some like old Asus whatevers I bought like 5 years ago, right? It looked like my screens were OLEDs. Like that's how I was describing it. They like made the contrast like
Hmm.
super pop. Everything is like dark and beautiful, and things that are contrasting with that are just like immediately catch your eye. All the new skills from what I've seen also just have like massively higher quality effects to them as well. When I first booted it up, I kind of like walked into my first dungeon and there was like a torchlight at the end of the hallway. I was just like, am I did they what did they do? They did something. Am I further away? Did they like up the scaling or something? It's just insanely beautiful.
Yeah, I didn't even think of it until you just mentioned it there. And the first thing that came to mind was definitely the contrast. They added a lot of coloration to not only, the world, but the items too, the text. And it's easier on the eyes in a lot of places. And it makes me think of almost a lot of times I've played a lot of modded Diablo games, and you have loot filters where you can color them every which way to really help you hone in on exactly what, you're looking for when you look at an item. And I feel like they took a lot of those ideas and sort of implemented them here into the items themselves. Now you can tell that you dropped a mythic unique and things of that nature that have really improved just like quality of life, and then also like you immediately feel it when you get into the game just from looking at it. So yeah, that's a good observation, I think.
Well, that's the only real critique and observation that I can really truly bring because I
Mhm.
didn't play nearly as much as you guys, but it was um, something that I thought was really cool to be like I already thought Diablo 4 looked amazing to begin with, but then to have that extra layer where a year in, I'm like, oh, this looks legitimately better. I'm excited to play a class and to cast a spell that I've done thousands of times, millions, I guess, at this point. Um, because it looks better. And I think with PoE 2 on the horizon, the better it looks, the better it'll fare. That's what people are going to do. They're going to make those kind of comparisons.
Yeah,
Um,
the graphics matter a lot to people. I'm I'm realizing I'm over here playing like Pokemon Red and Diablo 2 like LOD graphics. So it's not it doesn't have as much pull with as many people, but definitely you see it a lot. The graphics matter, and PoE 2 does look amazing. So glad D4 is stepping up their game. That's good. Competition's good, right?
The interesting part about, because you just said D2 and that's what I was originally thinking about. One of the issues I've had with D4 up until this point was a lack of visual clarity, something that like you had in LOD. Obviously we're talking about much older graphics, but like every individual thing was very clearly different against the background. And while D4 still suffers from all my cool giant black area of effect things are all covering the giant red area of effect things, so I don't know whether or not I'm standing on my blood surge or a fire, the monsters seem to like stick out a bit more. I was just able to read the game to a higher level of clarity, and like apparently that was legitimately holding me back because I was like dying a lot less. I felt like I actually kind of knew what was happening until like 15,000 lightning monsters were on top of me like always. But before that point, it felt a lot better.
well, visuals aside, let's talk math. Let's talk one of the jarring things that I noticed. Um, I log in, I've got my what was once a level 100 druid that I know was, they were the old versions. So my druid that had been sitting there at like 60k health was actually the old version that was probably around 40. And when I logged in, it had 1,000. Um, we got hit with a massive stat squish. Everything's a little bit lighter. And I've been saying for a while, I don't want to see billions and trillions worth of damage on the screen. I don't need to have that scaling. So this felt good. I liked it for a little bit. And then the end game came in, and you guys have probably spent more time at the end. I don't know if they solved that issue. I don't know if the millions and billions have actually really been removed or just removed from early. So what can you
Yeah.
guys tell me about the stats question? What was your experience with it?
So you made a good point about just the whole nature of this. Um, expansion and the PTR, everything we're testing, and they're just completely upending the entire game, right? That comes with a lot of mixed emotions. The number scrunch, I think, was really good where it worked. I think those billions of damage that you're seeing, the devs have said on a number of occasions that those are things that they know are just like server side, PTR side, and they're fixed in the actual expansion itself. I hope that that rings true because my experience in my playthrough, I leveled 1 to 60, in the early days when we didn't have the boost option the first couple of days of PTR, and it felt really good actually having that number scrunch. I felt like as I was leveling, the upgrades to my items didn't matter nearly as much as they do like current day Diablo 4 before the number scrunch happened. I was getting upgrades of like 100 item power and my DPS going up by like 3 on my weapons. And so I wasn't really necessarily feeling it, but that also made me feel like it wasn't really necessary I really need that upgrade in order to get through my leveling process. I also like seeing the smaller numbers. It's just easier to keep track of. It felt like they proportionately adjusted everything in the game appropriately. I didn't feel like I was doing too little damage at any given time during the playthrough, the 1 to 60. But I think they need to figure out, the millions and billions of damage that are being done in the end game now. I'm expecting that it's mostly fixed. But I'll be curious to see, right now people are clearing pit 100s, which is the highest tier of difficulty in 1-2 minutes on some classes, and I'm wondering if fixing the bugs will, we're going to adjust those numbers down significantly, and where kind of we all end up in that pit leaderboard at the end of the day, or where they want us to end up, because it's nowhere near the difficulty of pit 200, in current day. So I'll be curious to see how the end game definitely weighs out. But there are some other things about end game I want to talk about, and things that really don't make sense to me, but it has less to do with the number scrunch and more to do with how the end game progression felt. But I'll let Macro talk on what he thought of the number scrunch.
I I think I have almost the exact opposite opinion in that I think they have not accomplished anything basically with any of the changes other than how do I describe this? The first 4 difficulty levels don't matter. Hopefully they unlock Penitent right off the jump, because right now you just have to hit level 50 and then you go into Penitent and you do 10 strongholds and then you're level 60. For people who didn't play it, I think I was level 60 solo farming really inefficiently, stopping and talking with chat in about 5 hours. I was level 60, which seemed kind of bananas to me, if I'm going to be quite honest. And then I didn't experience challenge until I was trying to get into Torment 3. I had successfully beat Pit Tier 38. You need to do 35 to get into Torment 2. And I only had item power 750 gear. I had only tempered on resistances, and I hadn't put a single Paragon point in yet. And something about that seems like very, very weirdly off to me. Once I was actually pushing through the pit and all of a sudden my gear mattered and what I was doing mattered, that actually felt really good. And then without intentionally using like the Air of Perdition, which was the mythic helmet that was basically doing like 3x damage just by putting it on, I then went and cleared like tier 100 on like multiple builds. Something is very, very off with the difficulty scaling in the game if the Necromancer is doing that with the scuffed gear that we currently have. Now, 1 to 60, that experience felt pretty good. Like when I found an aspect or a temper, it was like, oh, sick, now I get to go put this thing on. That felt very good. And then it just kind of like stopped existing until pit tier 85. And then I went, oh, I guess let me go, masterwork my gear. And then I beat tier 100. And it was just like, why are there 8 difficulties now if I did that in 2 days without getting like rushed, without getting, like you said, like we didn't have the boost or anything like that. That was just a naturally farmed character that just kind of like went and did that. It felt very weird to me. And I was hoping that the stat squish would make it so I wasn't doing billion DPS. And on my worst build, I was doing billion DPS by the end of it. And it was just like, there's a disconnect here, and I'm not exactly sure where it is.
So
Yeah, I guess.
Um,
For stat squish, I wasn't taking it like literally as like we're just nerfing your characters. I'm looking at it in the sense of they moved all the numbers down, and now it's much easier to like process when you're doing a playthrough 1 to 60, and that was kind of the really good feeling that I had from it. And then yeah, but like when I said I got an upgrade to my item and it didn't really make a difference, like I felt like I really didn't need to upgrade to progress through the game because, like you said, that challenge wasn't there. So I don't know that the purpose of the stat squish was to add challenge necessarily. Like I'm not sure what the intention of it was from the devs, but in terms of like the simplicity of doing a playthrough, which is going to be what most players probably start and at I don't know how many even make it to that real end game level where they're doing billions of damage. I think that experience has been drastically improved. But
I can
yeah,
agree with that for sure. Like I said, like that first like 60 levels of just like playing my character through and like, oh, I finally got a legendary piece of gear, which means I can go temper it. Okay, cool. Now I've like unlocked this functionality that lets me generate my mana or whatever. That felt very, very good. And then like it kind of just like went it just kind of like became pixie dust after that.
yeah.
And I also expected all the numbers just to be smaller. And this is in this season is the first time that we've seen the infinity symbol in this PTR. It turns out if the number gets high enough, they just show infinity now, which that's pretty good DPS, I would say. Infinity is pretty good for a DPS number.
it could be infinity plus something else. Um, one of the because I caught the infinity now, which is absolutely wild. One of the more popular posts that has been coming up on Reddit has been pointing out that maybe like multiplicative damage is the root of the issues that we have by comparison to additive. Is that something that you think would be helpful to kind of rein in infinity damage? To, I'd imagine there has to be a massive redesign since there are so many multipliers out there. Uh,
The, I, I
but
think
is
the
it
problem
possible to squish where you don't get to this point because of multipliers?
I don't know that the problem is inherently in multipliers. I think multipliers can exist in the game and there not be a billion damage. I think the problem is they introduce these new things every season, new aspects, new skills, and the interactions don't work as they intended. And that's what's breaking the game. That's what's causing the billions of damage, and not the fact that you have like a like 10, 20% multipliers. Because that doesn't equal a billion damage. And if you run the numbers on a lot of these like calculations that are getting to the billions of damage, you end up not being able to back into the math, and then you explain it by, oh, it's a bug, it's an interaction that's not working as intended. And we see this every single season with something that they introduce, and I don't know if that's just the norm, if that's what's to be expected going forward. I'm so glad that they started doing PTRs so we can at least catch some of it before it releases, because this was something that I've been adamant about since the game first launched. But it's really those unintended interactions that seem to be causing it, and not the fact that multiplicative damage exists. That is what balloons it out of control, yes, but I don't think you're addressing the right problem by just saying remove all multiplicative. I think they gotta fix how the new things that they introduced to the game function. But
I,
that's my thought.
I think a really good example, and like, please correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously you're the rogue dude. Victimize has been a victim of this reality all the time. Because if I'm not mistaken, Victimize is a key passive for the rogue that says lucky hit chance to be able to apply this damage proc, and it scales based off of your sheet damage, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it's not even just like if I have 500 vulnerable damage, that will give me this. Because your character sheet does a calculation on how much additive damage you have in certain buckets, it will take that number instead, which just like isn't real. It's not an actual number that exists in the game. They finally gave the Necromancer a similar issue. Our new key passive Affliction says based off of your vulnerable damage, whatever. And if you add a thing that says plus 20% vulnerable damage, it takes your character sheet and it does this big old calculation to make it easier for the character to understand it. But that number doesn't actually represent how much damage you have, but then the game calculates based off of it. So like that's like one of these circumstances where we're just like getting rewarded for things that shouldn't work that way. And then on top of that, you have 18 different things that all say multiplier damage by 1.5. Are multipliers the issue? No. I think one of the issues realistically is that aspects moved away from transforming stuff on your character and have all just become, if you meet this requirement, get a damage multiplier. So like the newest aspect on the Necromancer, the Great Feast. What does it do? Gives you 45% bonus damage. You just have to generate 7 essence per second, which oddly enough is not hard. Does that transform my experience in some way? No, it just gives me 45% damage on every single build because it's a generic multiplier. So I think it's kind of two parts. One, yeah, oddly enough, even if you make the numbers really small, if you put enough multipliers on it, you will get to a big enough damage, big enough number. But simultaneously, the cool toys that we're getting are less transformative and less things that you build into, and are just more things that say, hey, you did more damage because you built your character right. Good job.
I'm gonna pause and try and parse all the math that just happened there, so I can truly absorb it. But I know I do appreciate this kind of perspective because I think you guys are. I am a build follower, right? I don't sit and craft with my Paragon, and that's a conversation for later. I don't want to do that. I trust you guys, and I see the work that you put in behind the scenes to craft these builds. So it is kind of cool to hear that because I think it is easy to look and be like, okay, so it's probably just because of X, Y, or Z, and they just need to fix that, and it is more complicated. Um, so multipliers aside, let's go back to what was brought up before as well, the difficulties. There are a lot. Um, I'm personally enjoy the current amount of difficulties. It makes a lot of sense to me. I get where they're going with wanting like, oh, it's just gonna be natural. You'll go through a pit and then you get another difficulty. I don't know if I love that. Am I wrong?
From bottom to top, the difficulty in Diablo 4 Season 6 makes zero sense to me. I don't get it at all. The whole progression system, I don't like. First off, even if Penitent becomes available at level 3, why do you have 4 difficulties that you can start off with at level 1? Like that seems like way too many. You should have like a hard and easy. If you want a middle one, fine, but 4 difficulties right when you start out, like that already seems like too many, and then there's more difficulty as you get on, and we finally get to like equivalent difficulty to what we had before, but then you're progressing and you need to progress your glyphs in pits which scale past anything that you could find in the overworld. So you're leveling your glyphs in this area that's the hardest area in the game to get your glyphs to a higher level so you can do more of the pit content to get them higher. And then what do you do when you're done the pit? Like, what are you getting your glyphs to a higher level for? To run nightmare dungeons to get your masterworking materials finally? Do you know how much you're going to shred a nightmare dungeon after you just grinded pits to pit 90? Like, you're going to go into a nightmare dungeon and it's going to feel like you started on easy, like on easy mode. And that's where we're supposed to end our progression. It makes no sense to me. Like, the nightmare dungeon system, if that's where they want it to if that's where they want masterworking materials to go instead of the pits, they need to completely rework that system before season 6, in my opinion, because it just doesn't serve that, like, it doesn't scratch the itch of that meaty end game system that I want to be grinding out. Especially after you've just made your way through the pits, it's gonna feel like nothing. So I have issues, I think I would say, to put it lightly, with the difficulty. But curious to hear your guys' thoughts.
The I really like the concept of it because it's trying to solve my understanding of what the developers want, mostly from their campfire chat, right? Like how they themselves described it was we needed a fix for the fact that all the content in the game other than Infernal Hordes and the Pit is very easy and meaningless. Like, do you go do a Legion when you finally run out of iron chunks and like leather? Sure, why not? But you don't do the world boss. You don't care about legions, not really. You just didn't run nightmare dungeons after. Like I've never leveled a glyph to level 21 because I refuse to do nightmare dungeons. I get them to 15 to activate them and I move on with my day. So then the question was, how do you make the nightmare dungeons relevant? Oh, that's where we put the masterworking materials. But then what about the pit? Well, the pit's going to be your key to unlocking difficulties, and difficulties are what are going to reward your grinding. So if you can get to Torment 4, you will get the most ancestral uniques, most ancestral legendaries, and the most mythic uniques. That will be your best drop rate there. It was a known bug that in the PTR that wasn't working properly. So everybody's like, why would I run Torment 4 if I'm not getting items? Apparently that was bugged. Now, that means we don't get to see what it actually is, so we don't get to give feedback. But on paper, I understand the concept, and I think the concept has some merit. The issue being that I think you have to clear, you have to clear tier 65 to unlock Torment 4. If you can beat a tier 100 pit, which scales beyond the minimum requirements for Torment, exactly like Lucky just said, you are going to run through Goa Ruins and you're just going to just one-shot every single elite pack, because you do have to kill the elites to get the masterworking materials. It's not just like a cache at the end. So they got you there. You gotta run the dungeons, get bent. And then you kill the boss and you get like some drops. I get it. I'm curious to see how it actually feels in the real game when like these bugs are fixed and it's like, oh, I can't just push the pit higher. You know what? I can't just level up my glyph anymore. I need to go work on my gear if I want to push higher. Like I want to see that part of the loop, where right now I wasn't experiencing it because there was no way to boost without getting the materials. So I already had the materials to masterwork, etc., etc. But I went and ran Nightmare Dungeons. Like I masterworked some of my gear up 4 out of 4 because, non-ancestral gear can't go any higher. And I was like, cool, it's nice to have a reason to do these Nightmare Dungeons. My major thing is I kind of agree with you. Those first 4 difficulties, they're there for people. They're there for people who aren't playing a strong enough build or do not have the game knowledge or the time to learn how to play in higher difficulties. I understand why they're there. As long as they don't force me to play through them, I'm fine with that. Whoever wants to have normal and expert and hard, whatever, they can absolutely have them. My major issues with the Torment levels, like Torment 1 and 2 just like didn't matter. They said like you shouldn't even expect to get to Torment 4. And I'm like, I don't think there's a single person playing this game who shouldn't expect to get to Torment 4 based off my experience, as long as they're playing a competently created build. They don't even have to do it themselves, but if they read a good build guide, they will be in Torment 4 currently.
So it sounds like we should have one difficulty that's really easy, and we should have one difficulty that's hard that most people play in, and then we just have like an extra difficulty at the end for people to play in who, like are in the upper echelon, right? Not for everybody, but they'll get there. So like 3 difficulties, really. Maybe, you know what? Maybe we have like an introductory difficulty for the people who are just coming into the game who don't know it. And they're like, they really need some hand holding. So 4 difficulties is what I'm thinking. We just break it down. Solved it.
And maybe well, and you know what, we're making a joke here, but the very interesting thing about how they describe the difficulties themselves, like in the game, Penitent said this difficulty is for masters of Diablo 4 who have legendary gear and some relevant tempers. And I liked that description of Penitent as a way of marking how the developers currently believe a build needs to function to succeed in a difficulty. The idea of already being impenitent and not having a kit full of legendary items and having not tempered my gear is a very weird concept to me, because the only person who would not be doing that must be brand new to the game, which they're expecting because of the expansion, right? Like a ton of new people are going to be playing. But the reward for doing that is that you get to leave the first 4 difficulties sooner and you get to the end game sooner. And it's like we're like intentionally making people who are worse at the game spend more time in the early game, I guess as a teaching opportunity, which sounds good on paper, but it's like you don't get to progress faster. Even if you've figured it out, you have to grind through and you have to get to Penitent first. And that just like really, really confused me.
It's I'm I think like a good preface to this entire conversation is it's a PTR, right? Uh, I think the last PTR we had, I wasn't a huge Infernal Hordes fan. I didn't see how it was going to be integrated, and now I run them all the time because I think they're super fun. They took a lot of good feedback. They've turned it into something. I think they can obviously here. I don't know if they're gonna shorten it. I don't know if they're gonna drop those difficulties down. Um, I don't know if they got that kind of time. They already have the UI assets. Like it might be complicated, but maybe they can at least add the weight. Like as you're talking about macro, if Torment 1 and 2 feel useless, maybe there is a way to rebalance it so that doesn't happen. What I would hate to see though is like they hear what you say about Torment 1 and 2, they're like, "Oh, we should just slow it down." So it feels like you get like progression, but we just stretch it. Um, as opposed to, oh, if they feel useless, let's shorten them, let's combine them. Let's just make Torment 1, 2, 3, whatever they might do. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how they even parse the amount of feedback that they got about the PTR. Because we're just scratching the surface. We're talking number squish and difficulties, which are just things that slap you in the face right away, but aren't even as groundbreaking as some of the other components. Because I think we could actually spend too much time talking about difficulty. Well, let's shift a little bit. Because we can't complain about all the torments, though I will say it did give me Diablo 3 flashbacks. Um, and not in a good way. I like Diablo 3. I do. I don't like 16 difficulties. Um, that's cool. That's cool. Uh, let's talk the new Paragon system. So I have professed many times here that I don't like having to allocate 200 some points every time I level. Um, and that feedback did not get heard at any point because new Paragon is 300 points, but you don't have to earn them all every time. It's account wide. Um, and we get 10 new skill points. Also kind of cool. Shift things up a bit. You deal with the math. You put together build guides. Also, I'm RIP to every build guide that you guys have written and put together. I'm so sorry for your losses because I know the work that went behind the scenes to make all those.
That's been like every season for the last like 3 seasons. Oh man, we're used to it at this point, right?
Yeah.
But I trust you guys. So as you're looking at this new Paragon system, as you're looking at 10 new additional skill points, without going into like your class per se, because we'll talk classes soon, and I know there are soapboxes you guys need to get on. Um, is this new Paragon system an improvement, or is it, I don't know, an alternate upgrade? What's the a parallel move, I guess would be the best equivalent I can think of off the top of my head. What's your
Uh,
assessment of it?
I will make mine very short and sweet. I think that the new Paragon system is strictly an upgrade for the majority of the player base because you pick the 5 boards that have multipliers that are the easiest for you to do. That's very, um, you can intuit that very easily. And then you pick every single good node. You can't mess it up. If it says good stats, you could just click them and you will be that much stronger. You put in the glyphs that say your damage goes up and you are all set. It does have some of the old min-maxing that will differentiate a fine Paragon board from like an elite level, like I've min-maxed every stat Paragon board, but they have vastly simplified it to a degree where I think 99.99% of the people out there will come up with the exact same Paragon for basically all of their builds and just swap out like one board. And maybe that's fine. It's less interesting to me, but I do think it's better for everybody who is not the the top 1%, basically.
Yeah, what Macro said without saying is that you don't really have to theory craft Paragon boards anymore. I mean, it's just it's the any sort of you know uh, complications with planning out your Paragon board are removed with the new system, limiting it. It's only five. It makes the choices very obvious. It makes the differences in Paragon board to be not very significant. Um, but I will say that the upside of the change that I see personally is I really don't like infinite Paragon or infinite scaling like you saw in Diablo 3. And while I don't know that anyone hit 300 Paragon in the PTR, it was only like 4 days or so since we had the boost available. The highest I saw was maybe 230-ish, 240. So 300 seems kind of achievable. I think that if they allowed more Paragon boards, then you would really see the need to get to 250 to 300 Paragon. While and that grind seems much longer than level 100 was previously. So if they're moving, the needle with this new 300 Paragon, but with the restrictions that they placed on the Paragon boards, they've almost said like this carrot is here if you want it, but it's not going to mean as much as if you had access to as many boards as you wanted. So for someone who doesn't really love that part, like just the endless grind, just like I need to sit here and just do one task over and over and over and over again, like getting to level 99 in Diablo 2. That takes so long, and the advantages of doing it level off after 91, 92. You don't really need those last couple levels, and I feel like that exists right now in the Paragon system. They're still going to matter, but just not as much as if you had free reign. So it's a double-edged sword. It removes theory crafting a bit, but also at least we don't have that need to push to 300 Paragon to complete your build or to be competitive. So take it and leave it. But those are my thoughts.
I think that's also like something kind of really interesting for people to sit down and digest. If you weren't a Diablo 2 fan, what Lucky just said might have been a very traumatizing or scary thing. You're not going to max out your character. Your character is not going to be perfect. And I don't mean like you're not going to have the right stats or like you're not going to have triple GA. I mean, most people are probably not going to finish their character in a season because you shouldn't expect to get up to the maximum Paragon points. Luckily, if I like very quickly napkin math it, 5 to 10 Paragon points will be equivalent to roughly one affix on your gear, and that will stop having any significant meaning around the 250 point range, where like you actually won't be able to gain stats that are so impactful that would actually change the gear that you're wearing anymore. So just be like strictly like a little bit more max life, a little bit more additive damage, maybe like a little bit more damage reduction depending on your class. And I like that there's something after max level to keep working through. I like that it's not infinite. I'm not excited for making a build guide where I say, here's the 250 point version of the Paragon board, and then here's for the lunatics who get the other 80 points, and not wanting to do progression steps between those two realities because nobody's going to do there or get there. Um, and for the person to be like, well, once you hit 312 Paragon points, you can actually pick up this node of shadow resistance. Meaning I can, like, I'm not excited for that part of it, but it's cool. They avoided at least the pitfall of it being infinite. And it, again, it makes it much easier for like the majority of the player base. And I think that that's a net positive. It's just less inspired, I would say.
Yeah, and if you're a PoE fan, it's similar as well to Diablo 2, where you don't really hit level 100. It's just another passive point, kind of the same idea.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you guys both kind of bring that up because that did come to my mind of that was something that Diablo 4 was lacking of like, you know, if I grind for 4 hours at level 100 and I don't get one piece of loot, I could, arguably in the new system, be able to say, at least I gained 3 Paragon points or whatever it is. And while that's not much, it's something. Um, and that was always a struggle in the old. It's weird to say old because it's still current, but in the current version of Diablo, where I can spend all this time and walk away technically with nothing, which is not what I want. Um, so I get that. I still don't want to spend 300 points. I don't want to have to do that every time, but I will come to peace with it. I will come to peace with it. It'll be fine. I will look at both of your guides and I will just follow along. Um, is it an illusion by choice though now? If that is what it is.
Sort of always was, but much more so now.
I think I think what made the illusion strong, because like I don't know, I always get a little bit weird in the conversation of like illusion of choice because ultimately it's a video game that has coding, right? So like at the end of the day, I can't make Diablo come riding through on a cool horse because that's not in the coding. But uh, the illusion was obfuscated significantly harder in the previous version of it. And now again, other than like some very slight min maxing where like I'm eking out just enough strength nodes for armor where I can have one more affix on my boots instead of you, and that's going to differentiate which one of us does pit in less seconds. That's that's been flattened. That's been it's or plateaued. I would say plateaued because flattened realistically it wasn't ultimately that complicated before, but it plateaus at a much lower level, I will say. And if you cared about it, you cared about it. If you didn't care about it, it's literally just easier for you. Again, I think the majority of people are going to be a lot happier, and I'll leave my grievances for other things. This is fine. It's points on a board. I also don't want to put in that many times.
Just don't bring set items, please. We don't need to trivialize it that much.
Bit time. So I do hear you though, Macro, and I think from a casual standpoint, I don't describe myself as casual. I don't think you know put a robe on and pretend to do a podcast as a casual, but for the casual player, I do think Paragon is not logical, and I think this newer system does seem more casual friendly, where, as you alluded to before, you can't really make a mistake. Because you just are going to have so many points that won't happen, and by limiting the boards, yeah, it'll piece itself together. So that's good. More people hanging out, more people playing, and more people to play with, because we're going to have a reason to play with them. Um, how much do you think the PTR is hindered by missing those key components that are going into the expansion? As you talk about leveling, as you talk about difficulties, not having mercenaries, not having raids, um, like those are big things that like essentially are ripped out of this loop. Do you think that hinders our view of what Diablo 2.0 is?
I mean, so both yes and no, right? Because at the end of the day, if the Citadel is the hardest thing in the game, then absolutely. But if the hardest thing in the game is Pit 100, then these other things that we're going to do are expanding our our board of activities, and we're able to at the very least see what the terminus of like build power is and bugged interactions. I think the PTR is always incredibly valuable, if only for those things. And what it kind of did was it made me a little bit more excited. Like I got to be like, look at what my build is doing, and I don't even have mercenaries yet. Like, look at what my build is doing, and we're not in the new content yet. Especially like before I even had like the new gems, I didn't even have all my Paragon. I'm like, imagine what this will do with Glyph level 100. Imagine what this will do with Max Paragon. That was very exciting. That was tantalizing in a way that I think previous PTRs were just really about like getting in there and just testing as much stuff as possible. Um, but I'm kind of glad you got to see the mercenaries though. If you were paying attention, they were in the Hell Tides doing stuff. You had Subo over there drinking some sake and just being depressed, I guess, and you had Rahir like holding up a shield and protecting you. I was like, ooh, they're out here. That's actually pretty sick. But I'm kind of glad we didn't see everything, and I know not everybody is like super excited about that, but like I do want to be excited about new stuff. That's kind of the curse of being in this position that we are. It's like we don't get to be surprised as often, and at least here it's like, oh, sick. Like I have no idea what the Citadel is going to be like. I can't wait to like walk in there and just get absolutely wrecked.
Yeah, big difference from this PTR compared to other PTRs in that that content was really held back, and that's going to be the crux of this season 6. Like they're doing two things at once, right? We're getting all these new systems introduced to the game, but at the same time, we're getting a whole expansion. We're getting a new class that has not been tested with a whole set of uniques that hasn't been tested, and then we're getting new campaign, new story. There's so much to be excited about that is still coming, but it was nice to at least get a feel for some of those new systems that we're going to be interacting with, from day one, and really, you know, like Macro said earlier, they're expecting a lot of new players to come for this expansion, and the worst thing for me as a content creator and for the game and for the lifeblood of any video game or Diablo 4 is for someone's first experience to be hampered by something that could be so easily found in a PTR or something like that, and then it affects their playthrough negatively. They have a negative opinion about the game, and we've lost a new player because of that. So as much as we can do to test all of those things, work out all the kinks to get a real polished season 6 and expansion drop at the same time, I think is good. And but I don't like I don't like having it spoiled for me. I like there to be some surprise when the game launches. Like it was fun to play like the early versions of Diablo 4, and then we did our review videos, and then the game launched. It was like, oh, I kind of already played through this whole thing. I've already played 100 hours of this game. It's a little bit less exciting. It was exciting when I played it, but that all had to be off stream. But I like that there's this content that I haven't seen that I get to go and grind for, and I'm big on like racing. I like to race in Diablo games, and like the first raid clear is something that I'm super excited about. I don't know anything about it, so that's like even more. Just that whole experience is so uh, like it's so exciting, and you only get those opportunities so often when new things get introduced into the game. In the last couple seasons of Diablo 4, there really wasn't much there. Like Infernal Hordes, we got to PTR test them. The last one I can think before that was Uber Andariel getting introduced to the game, and she ended up being like a cakewalk. It was so easy. I love getting together with people, trying to pinpoint like go over the tape like NFL films or something. Like we review the fight and see what we had to do differently to get past it, and that's how I imagine this raid is gonna all play out at the end of the day. And that stuff really excites me. So I'm glad that it wasn't spoiled, and we all get to kind of experience it together as a community for the first time, and not just like a couple of us have already seen it all behind closed doors, and we already know exactly how to do everything. So it's more fun that way. I don't
It,
think the PPR is lacking for not having it.
it'll be interesting, obviously, as launch day gets closer and closer to see what the Dark Citadel holds, to see how uh, group content in Diablo is received. Granted, we got a party finder. Did you guys mess around with party finder at all while you were playing?
Yeah, I like clicked the buttons. I put a party out there. My buddy joined it when I didn't notice, and somebody else joined my party and I didn't notice, and then I didn't know what we were doing. And then one of the people's like, "Well, let's go run that dungeon that you signed up for." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot that I put a dungeon. I don't. I actually don't want to run that dungeon at all. Sorry." Uh, but it worked, and that was cool. No, the game's needed a party finder this entire time. Now I just need an auction house so I can actually trade in game, and they can have better oversight about like where gold is going, and people aren't getting like randomly banned just because they hand out like 3 billion gold. Well, not banned, but you know what I mean. Um, it it's good. I'm glad it's there. The existence of it is like, okay, cool. Now just make sure that like people are like rewarded for grouping up, and that there's no way to really like grief on it, and then we're all Gucci. But I did click the buttons a couple times.
the interface seemed um, a bit lackluster in my opinion. I had a lot of also bugs, just like game crashing bugs. So couldn't really, I think, experience it to its full potential. I'm glad it exists. This game was highly touted as a game that we're going to be playing together. We're going to cross each other in the overworld, and we're going to join parties and slay demons together. And I haven't really felt it, all that much. But this, especially with the upcoming raid, will probably be a tool that gets used. I hope it gets used at least, because I'd like to see more of that sort of interaction. And one of the problems people have a lot with the Diablo games, and you hear this, there was a statistic quoted, say 85%, 95% of the player base plays this game solo, and now there's a raid boss that's introduced and you're not able to do it solo. Like, you got to give something to those players and give them the opportunity to find someone. Maybe we don't know why they're playing solo. I think the statistic is a little bit skewed because it's so hard to find a group in general in Diablo 4. So what is it? It's like the chicken or the egg. Like, why are the solo numbers so high? And I'm thinking that maybe this party finder helps balance that out a little bit, and people don't feel like they have to play solo, and can group up and play more efficiently that way. But we'll
I
see.
went a year without grouping up and playing with people. I was in a group at the start at launch, and then the next time I was in a group of people was with Rod Ferguson and Greg Miller when we were doing our thing. I went a year because one, I predominantly play hardcore, so it's already a smaller pool, and it's hard to find people. It's hard to like find a group. Yes, there's a clan, all that kind of stuff, but I'm if I'm playing on PlayStation, I'm not sending out messages, and I want to just jump in. I'm not going to go on Discord and try and get people to play. I'm just I'll just play solo. And now, if I want to do something, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm glad it exists. I only played with it, just a little bit. Um, but I think it'll be ready for prime time. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, Macro. I want an auction house too. Um, I'm jealous of people who have the time to trade, who have the time to again jump on Discord and start spamming people's messages of 3 billion for this awesome item. I'm not I don't have the mental bandwidth to catalog my stash like that. Like, this is something I could sell later. No, it's either good enough to sell to the vendor. I'll take my, 1,000 gold or whatever I get and move on, because that's all I can trade. Uh, I think Diablo 3 messed trading up for this franchise for a little bit. Maybe there's a bazaar that is in Kurust. We know it exists. It feels logical to be like, hey, turns out they're using it again. Now you can trade items there. I would love it.
Yeah, this whole, like, the auction house, the trading platform, it it makes no sense to me why it doesn't exist already in the game. Like, I don't understand the thought process behind, okay, we are allowing you to trade items, but you literally cannot achieve it in our client. You need to go to a third party to do it. Why do you want players to not be in your game in order to serve a function that you are allowing us to do? Like, you have it in the game. It makes no sense to me. And every time you ask the devs and you use the words auction house, immediately it seems like their brain goes to Diablo 3 and real money auction house, and they think that's what you're talking about, real money auction house. But you need, like, I don't know how else to clarify. It's like, I want to sit them down and say, we're not talking about real money auction house. In-game gold, like that's what we're looking for, like, or in-game currency, runes, whatever. Give us something in the game where we can trade items to items with each other. That's all we're looking for. And it's just, it's like saying Voldemort or something to the devs. Whenever you say it, and I've been saying it even before the game launched, like, you need an auction house in this game. You need some ability to trade, and it gets shut down immediately. And it cannot for the life of me understand it, other than the Diablo 3 fiasco and the association of the words auction house. So we got to start calling it something different. The Bazaar, I like the Kuros Bazaar. Let's let's coin that. Let's get it in front of them, and you know give them the rundown of why you want this in your game, because I'm tired of going to third-party sites to trade too. And it seems like it's detrimental to the community to not have it at this point.
And
That
at this point, gold sellers are already out and rampant. It is no longer like we need to keep the community safe from them. They were there from day one. Now that gold has a function, they're there. I would imagine, and I will admit I can be wrong on this. If you give players the tools to trade effective gold in the game, they will be less likely to seek a third-party site to buy it.
That's
they
part of the point, right? You're sending them to these third-party sites, and the third-party sites are advertising gold buying. Like you reduce just that alone. Sorry, macro, but I mean it's a great point.
yeah, it's the to that exact point, like one, the bots are already there. The bots have been there the entire time. That's why we never get to trade. That's why they have to keep turning it off, right? Because they're like, well, we found a way to make 1,000 eggs again, and it's time for everybody to get purged. I like the once a season purge that happens. The funny part you brought up trying to discuss the auction house, because that exact same phenomena happens in the community as well. Because there's like a large contingent that's like D3 bad, and oddly enough, D3 wasn't bad. It was a huge success. People are still playing it to this day. They're finally in maintenance mode. It was a good game. Also, a lot of the people back then like looked fondly upon the auction house because it was cool to be able to make like $10 a week as a 13-year-old. Whether or not that was like exactly what should be happening in a video game, whatever. But I'm like, well, obviously we need an auction house, and people are like, never again, never forget the act. And I'm like, hey guys, hey, do you remember World of Warcraft? Do you remember going to the auction house in Orgrimmar? Do that. That's very, very clearly what I'm talking about. You could already go to a third party site and spend real money. Like having an auction house in the game that did the exact same thing wouldn't even stop that, because oddly enough, bot sellers would sell it for cheaper. But like, yeah, dog, let me trade stuff in this video. It was easier trading in Diablo 2 because you could set a game name and a description, and you would be able to successfully trade your items via text prompts 24 years ago. How are we here? How is this possible? It is lunacy to the highest degree. So hopefully the bazaar kicks off, which is a great, honestly, that's like a really nostalgia trip for me, because the first like successful you could go trade with other people in game in EverQuest was also the bazaar, and I loved going there, and it was super cool, and I couldn't figure out how to set my character in it, so that would be a little trip down memory lane for me as well.
All right, well, all three of us, well, we'll bring this to the devs. We're repackaging Auction House as the Curtis Bazaar, and I think we can make it happen. Yeah, I think we're all excited. We can do it. All right, so speaking of Blast from Past, we got two more points. And then you get your soapboxes for your respected class and why they need the most of the devs' attention before it goes live. So rune words. Rune words. I was really excited for this. Last podcast we did, nobody else was. Everybody else was crapping all over it. They hated it. I was like, hey, this is a nice little gem substitute. Yes, I get it's not a full rune word, but there's some fun there. There's some fun there. Um, so here I am again. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why rune words are bad.
They managed to avoid the biggest pitfall, which has been my soapbox since this game released, and since people were like, well, what about the rune words they were going to release? I hate rune words. I hate rune words in Diablo 2. I think the most successful rune words that were ever added were the new helmets, because they were just progression pieces and they filled a little bit of a niche, and then you got rid of them. And when the idea of putting Enigma and Call to Arms and Infinity into Diablo 4 was a reality, I was ready to burn my whole setup down. And what they managed to do was add in some cool niche things that you can get builds to do. Now, in reality, everybody's going to run Petrify and Warcry, unless your build very specifically needs the Overpower proc one. But it's a good system. It disproportionately benefits barbarians, but like that's the entirety of the game. So like, what can you do? Barbillions are now Barb Infinities, and nothing has stopped that or changed that or even slightly curtailed it. But like, whatever. It's not taking up a whole item slot. I don't have to go get 5 different runes that if I never drop it, my character doesn't come online. It doesn't just let me teleport like the sorceress and just completely demand that I have to use it. They added in some cool options. I like them. I wish that the early game versions were a little bit stronger or more interesting or solved issues a little bit better for builds because nobody's going to use the magic runes at all. Like they don't, you just won't use them. I don't even think you'll drop them in time to like have them matter in a realistic way. They're cool. I like that they do not demand that you have to do this thing just so that you become a sorceress. And I'm hoping that they add on to it significantly. My biggest gripe is that they changed the symbols of the runes. Why isn't Ja rune Ja? Why isn't Om rune Om? Why isn't Thul Thul? Sorry for the Thal lovers out there. It they Vex isn't Vex. What are we doing? Like, okay, I'm gonna take one more minute. For 2 different runes to exist that are the same phonetic word but to have different script denoting their character means that we have multiple cultures or such a large evolutionary change in the written script of the culture who initially created rune words that are doing the same types of magic that are somehow simultaneously both existent in this universe. I can go find a Ja rune. We are not that far out from Diablo 2 or Diablo 3. So my issue is, why is there another culture also doing rune word magic that has a different character alphabet but is using the same phonetic alphabet? That makes no sense via lore. Where's this other culture coming from? Um, Give me back my Ja rune. Okay, I think I bought lucky enough time. Hopefully the baby's good.
Looks good. Thank you for that. The things I like about rune words, and I think Macro touched on this, being able to use skills from other classes, very cool. Very Diablo 2-esque. I don't really have a problem with that. I also didn't like rune words in Diablo 2. That might be a surprise to some people, but I think that they were overall detrimental to the game because now really it replaced items in a lot of places, and it almost dumbed down the game. Now rune words are your best in slot for everything. Sorry guys. But yeah.
Let the baby talk. Let the
Yeah,
baby talk about rune words.
Yeah,
he's
I think
pissed. I
the
get
the
it.
lower end rune words maybe weren't. I think that the balance needs to be like tweaked on the rune words in general. Um, they don't seem to be like equivalents, even though we have all legendary runes. I don't think they're all like close together in terms of like how good they are. I think they could use some balancing. I think it was kind of rushed maybe a little bit into the game. I like the throwbacks, the callbacks, but otherwise, I think it's a system that needs to be hashed out a little bit more. Give me a second.
You're good
I
because I
will.
want to piggyback on what you said, Macro. I
What?
saw your post on this. I thought it was spot on. I wish Nineball was here to go into it because I feel like he would maybe have like some sort of tangent as to how it's even remotely possible.
Absolutely. And
I,
like
I
real quick, hey Nine Ball, if I'm so wrong, like if it was already in the books that like a different culture already also made runes and like this is all explained already, j- tell me to just shut up. But like, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
well, what I will point out is he doesn't listen to the show. Uh, you know, we've talked about it a few times. He just doesn't listen to podcasts. I'm just like, what? You got to support, but no, he won't do it. So don't shout him out. But you know who does listen? Leviathan. So Leviathan, it's September 11th. I want you to know that's the date we're recording for when this goes live. So you didn't know it was going to happen this late into the show, but here it is, just for you, bud.
Hi,
Um,
Leviathan.
so uh, coming back to it though, I think you do bring up it does feel like a little bit of an oversight that you would have what isn't an overly complicated design, and you would why not just give these new runes a different name or steal the design from the Diablo 2 runes? The current system makes no sense.
There has to
It,
be a reason why. Like, do they not have the license to use the art? Why would you make more work for yourself? Make a new art logo for a rune that already exists in the world. I don't understand it.
like there's merch with the old runes on them. My
Right.
Enigma shirt is not canon anymore. What are we doing here? Why are we retconning like Disney? Like it's insane. Like I feel like I'm watching Star Wars get changed in these rune words. I know it's dramatic, but like I'm a big lore nerd. And the moment somebody, I didn't notice it at first. I was like, oh, they're sideways. My brain can't see them. And somebody's like, oh, jaw is different. And I went, whoa, hold on. And I pulled up like every single rune. And I was like, Om is in Thulin. Just make new runes. Like what? They don't have to be called jaw. It doesn't have to do jaw stuff. Now that being said, they did pull back some of the old rune word names. So like there is call to arms, which is like the war cry one. I think that's very cool. Um, I'm glad that those are there. I didn't even realize that like on the item it shows you what the rune word name is. So there's like insidious pugilist, and I'm like, cool. I'm never gonna remember that, but it's cool that you did that. I'm glad that that's there.
Well, maybe they'll iron it out. Maybe they'll fix up some assets and put them in. Or maybe there is a lore reason. Maybe in the jungles of Nahatu, as we know, Akaret might be a central figure. Um, maybe it's Akaret. Maybe he also like took the ruins of previous cultures and made his own ones. Maybe that's where they come from. I'm just coming up with shit. So Blizzard, feel free to steal it and write that in. Um, that's
I
probably
think
not the
another
case.
cool thing that would be that could help the rune word, just like how they all interact with the game, is kind of how they worked in Diablo 2. Like Macro said, with the introduction of those helms, those are really good progression helms. But there's this thing in Diablo 2, this area called the Countess, where you could target farm them, right? And it's kind of like how our dungeon system works, at least how its original intention was, where you could go to an area, guarantee that you get, a basic affix. If you grinded out the Countess, you could guarantee that you would get these rune words that could carry you through like early game. If there were a way to almost target farm them to aid in your progression and have them actually be more meaningful in the early game, because right now I don't think they they help as much in the early game. I think that could really, help their like I guess where I see their purpose in Diablo 4. I think that'd be pretty cool if something like that existed. Maybe lower the offering in lower difficulties just so you can use them more. I don't know exactly how you do it, but really it's hard to consistently activate a rune until you have your end game build set up, or otherwise you really have to force it. And it doesn't feel good in like the early game. And we didn't really get to play with runes in our 1 to 60, but I'll be curious to see exactly kind of how they fit in once the game launches to that progression, or if they're just strictly an end game item. Because in Diablo 2, they were very much a progression item, which was cool.
I think it's
My
also kind of interesting, like when in looking at runes. I mean, they're runes, but really they're rune words. They don't function without the other. And I think that's a detriment to the system because if I don't have a matching one, or if I don't have one that logically pairs, I can't just slot one in somewhere and have it do something that would at least like give a marginal effect that would be worth sacrificing a ruby, or granted rubies aren't that great anymore either, but would be worth sacrificing a gem instead of it. That was kind of the fun of runes, especially in D2 when they were first coming out and you were figuring like, oh, well this is worth not putting in my topaz or whatever, because it's going to give me plus 15 lightning resist here instead, like whatever. Um, that's more fun to me. Like I want just a little bit more of that. So that's something for iteration down the road.
I want to very quickly, just so that if I'm right, I get to be like, next time you gotta listen to me. Here's my tinfoil hat prophecy. We know that the Undercity, the content type, is lauded as a great progression content type. That's one of the quotes that we have for it. And what if the Undercity is exactly what Lucky's talking about, where they expect you through the different like difficulty levels, that like caches of runes will be the reward at the end, and then you actually do have them available. and you are actively using them, I think it's a great point that's like, hey, it doesn't do anything until I have the other one, so they're not runes, they are only rune words. Um, I didn't really stop to think about that. I wanted them to be distinctly different from Diablo 2. I think that's the best way for them to not fall prey to what Diablo 2 did with rune words. So like if they make it too similar, I already saw people being like, "Oh, now give us, let me make like a 6 rune word." I'm like, "What if, hear me out, no. What if we no, what if we don't do that? And what if instead the gear that we already find in the game doesn't become irrelevant and the unique items that aren't very powerful become irrelevant, etc." So that's my prophecy. You're going to get caches of them in the Undercity content, and that will make progression, if you don't want to do the open world again for the sixth season in a row, you can basically just go down there and go get some power so that you can transition earlier. That's my idea.
Yeah, Undercity itself is one of the things I'm very much looking forward to. I want to see how this plays. Obviously, another new end game system, always exciting. Um, and eventually, we'll figure out what the balance is. So here it is, gentlemen. We're getting to the end. It's class time. Um, it's time to rant and rave about what your class is going to be like in, well, under a month. Uh, we talked a little bit about last podcast, and seeing new skills. It's harder by comparison to like the whole new class, right? Spiritborn looks awesome. It's got all these cool new bells and whistles. You've never played with it, so you're not sick of it. You've been playing this particular class for a long time. You love it, but then it just gets something maybe that doesn't live up to your hopes. Unless you're rogue, 'cause that skill fucking slaps. Uh, Druid, I hate. I hate the new Druid skill. I hate a channeling skill. I hate an Earth skill. I talked about it. I complained about that last podcast. In playing with it, it didn't wow me. I won't use it. That's okay. Um, but you guys make builds. You do the numbers. I want to know, am I gonna roll a necromancer in the future? Am I gonna roll a rogue in the future? And how are you feeling about your respective classes?
Well, I am uh, disappointed that I'm not going to be able to start Rogue in the expansion because I'm going to be playing the Spiritborn class. But the new Rogue skill, Dance of Knives, is going to be the best leveling experience that a Rogue has ever had. The problem with a Rogue always early was trying to keep up your imbuements. And right now with Dance of Knives, if you use an imbuement and then start channeling Dance of Knives, it is a channel spell. But don't. But hear me out. It will not stop. It's effectively whirlwind. And once you use your imbuement and you start channeling, it never stops. And every single attack that you do is imbued. That was the hardest thing for a rogue. You only got 2 imbuements, and then you have to wait 10 seconds to get them back. You are nonstop going to be blasting your whole leveling process. How it works in the end game, at least with rogue right now, is Victimize is totally bonkers. Like Macro was talking about it earlier. Um, Victimize was amazing in season 4. Then they totally broke it again in season 5, and now they have overcompensated and basically every end game rogue build is going to be what flavor of Victimize do you want to play. You have the ability now to play just about any core skill rogue that you want, and you could even do Dance of Knives, which isn't technically a core skill, but Victimize itself is so strong. You can play basically any core skill and you're going to absolutely destroy like tier 100 pits if it remains as it was in the PTR. So people are going to be saying, oh well, I'm playing a barrage build, or I'm playing a Dance of Knives build, but deep down, if you look at the inner workings, it's all just a fancy covering for what lays underneath, which is going to be Victimized. There are a few other things, maybe like a precision rapid fire rogue is still going to be strong, but really, these Victimized builds are what you're going to see really shine, and it's just the strongest rogue key passive, and it completely carries the class. What I would personally like to see before season 6 for the rogue is not necessarily like I don't like nerfs, but I would like having the option of being able to play how I want. So in that sense, it's nice that I could play any core skill and still be able to absolutely wreck with Victimize. But I would like to not be forced into only playing Victimize builds. There are a lot of negative implications that this has just on like the trading market and every like just the homogenization of what every rogue is going to look like. We're all going to be wearing the same exact things because every victimized rogue needs the same exact stats. And I like variety when it comes to builds and as a theory crafter, I like to try to think outside the box, but I have to struggle to find something that's even going to compete with any victimized build, and that doesn't really feel great. So I'd like to see more other key passives on that same level playing field. But like I said, I wish I were leveling a rogue, and I probably will get around to it at some point because Dance and Knives is just too fun to play. I mean, you're a whirlwind barb, but as a rogue now, it kind of reminds me of the old whirlwind assassin from Diablo 2. If you played that ever, really really fun to be able to play um, that sort of class, that sort of ability. And I'm glad I got the PTR to play it since I won't be able to play it at the start of Vessel of Hatred. But yeah, Rogue is eating well, I would say. We'll see. We'll see how see what takeaways we get from the PTR and where it ends. But as of the last day of the PTR, that was kind of the current state.
The Necromancer is great, no matter what anybody else says or what you hear or what anybody else posts about. Shoutouts to Ruse. Uh, it, there's an overwhelming number of issues with the class that are still present. We're still the slowest class. Ultimately, we are like the lowest scaling class. We have the hardest time fitting on our uniques and figuring out survivability while also doing damage. Now, all of that being said, I just need to be honest there for a hot second. Now let's hype it up because there are things to be incredibly excited about. This season is the widest, and for a little bit of context here, I think that the Necromancer has always had the widest field of viable builds. They just all had different amounts of gear requirements to get to that point. This is the widest total group of distinctly different builds that you can play on the Necromancer. I'm going to list them all for you, not in alphabetical order. I'm not that smart. Overpower Bone Spirit, still the strongest build. Overpower Blood Wave is now the second strongest build. Overpower Soul Rift Unmaker Necromancer. Non-overpowered Soul Rift Unmaker Necromancer. Pure Affliction Auto Curse Necro, or if you click the button, do more damage. Truly an actual AFK build. And if they leave the Dark Shroud armor the way that it is right now, you're permanently stealth while doing tens of millions of damage around you in an AoE. That's got to get fixed, but if it doesn't, go enjoy that. Uh, Bloodlance is cracked. Blood Surge will still be incredibly good in Infernal Hordes, but its single target damage is much worse now. Sever is finally like a fully meta viable build, and probably has like the lowest unique item requirements out of everything. Blight is actually pretty decent. You will be able to play. Oh my god, there's just so many things. Things that aren't good. They are viable, but only around like tier 75 in the pit, probably. Like, probably won't get much higher than that. Minions, they didn't get any new toys. Corpse Explosion, they still nerf that into the ground. Please, dear God, let me actually cast probably like the most iconic skill that the class has and actually have it feel good. God, minions are just like so not great, and it's really upsetting. But you can do Bone Spear too. You can't do actual Bone Spear. You can't make Bone Spear do damage, but if you find Deathless Visage and you scale only the critical strike damage from the explosions, then you can do Bone Spear. So that's Bone Spear, crappy minions, Blood Lance, Blood Surge, Bone Spear to overpower, Unmaker, overpower, Unmaker, Affliction, Blood Wave. It's 9 competent, viable endgame builds that all use different gear and do different things. The major issue is basically the majority of Necromancer builds are all trying to figure out, can I also overpower? Because the way that they changed how overpower works, or rather, the way that they changed our maximum life, overpower got significantly stronger, and I'm expecting it to get nerfed into the ground again, especially because the Barbarian can equip 4 weapons worth of maximum life, and when you only have 400 base life, and then you get up to 12,000 maximum life, That's a lot of multiples to scale your overpower damage. It's still the slowest class. It feels really janky to do some of the most powerful things that you can do on it. Sadly, you can't just hold down a button and obliterate the screen. But there's so many very cool and interesting interactions. Probably about half of them are bugged. But if there was ever a time to try to dip your feet in and understand the hilarious jumble of code the Necromancer is, Season 6 will be that season. So shoutouts to the worst class in the game. I don't care if it's low on the tier list. They're incredibly fun. You're still going to be speed farming tier 100. You just won't be teleporting 15 screens a second. That's my pitch. Please give us a mobility skill. Why are we slow by design?
Well, I mean, the Necromancer has been carrying the weight of the franchise for years, so it's probably
You know
it.
what? So no joke. That's actually something that I heard very recently. Was kind of this idea of like the Necromancer, other than the Paladin, I would argue that the Necromancer is the most iconic class in the series. Maybe Barbarian after that. I don't think Diablo 4 should be where it gets its comeuppance. I don't think Diablo 4, like if you go look at the number of people playing the class, it's the lowest across the board. Nobody cares about the class. It's like me and 12 other just nerds in a corner being like, how do we make this good? And I have no problem being an underdog. That'll just make the victory all the much more sweeter once I get to run at max movement speed without having to sacrifice all my damage. But that was something that somebody said recently. I was just like, I almost get that. I thought that we already sacrificed the paladin to that. Like I already thought we took the most loved class and put it in the ground like Old Yeller, and I didn't think we had to sacrifice anymore. But apparently the necromancer is it.
I mean, when they announced the Spiritborn, Necromancer got a little bit more slow, I think. Like that was until the Paladin
Because
comes back.
I've played the Spiritborn. Okay. I come back from playing the Spiritborn, right? Like a phenomenal class. Everybody's gonna play. It's gonna be the best. And my chat is like, well, how do you feel about it? And I'm like, unironically, it was like I got slapped in the face playing this class. Like your basic skill attacks are movement skills, your core skills are movement skills, your utility skills are movement skills, you can teleport, your ultimates are movement skills, everything's a movement skill. They all give you movement speed. They give you 100% chance to block. I'm the block class. I'm the only one with the shield and they block better than me. I'm a thorns class. They do thorns better than me. And I definitely didn't have a breakdown about that. Don't worry about it. It was like it's like the Spiritborn is the anti necromancer, and it's so wild.
I feel
Well,
like it got all the potentially cool druid stuff too for the druid lovers out there. It's like you could have applied half of these skills to the druid class, and you just gave it all to the spiritborn, huh? Like that's how you got to do it. Oh
yeah,
man.
pre-reveal, I was expecting the Spiritborn to be the mix of witch doctor monk, and it definitely has leaned way more into the monk and grabbed a bunch of druid along the way, where like all these different spirits that are logical and connected to nature, like that's awesome. There's also a class that has spirits that are connected to nature, but we don't need to worry about them. They don't count. It's okay. It's okay. They've only got like the worst class quest and entire class ability, but it's okay. It's okay. They can pick up their stat sticks and deal with it in bear form, I guess. Uh, that's a problem for a different day. It'll be figured out. There are smarter people around that. Well, we're running late. Um, our babies, they need to be put to bed, even though they sleep through the night because you've been blessed. Um, there are different time zones. It's so much later, and you guys are getting older, so we've got to be mindful of that.
This is
But
for everyone listening. Yeah.
yeah, uh, before you guys go, where can everybody find you? We talked about it at the front end of the show, but here at the back end, where can everybody find you so they can go follow and enjoy all of your content um, before release and then obviously after?
Uh, I'm Lucky Luciano on Twitch, Lucky Luciano 6 on YouTube. But really, my best content is those Twitter X posts. Those are the good ones where I share things like the ultrasound that we got and things like that. But now if you want to check out rogue content, I'm going to be also playing the Spiritborn Come Vessel of Hatred, and every once in a while we get some Diablo 2 action going. That's my true love game is Diablo 2. I still mix some of that in every now and then, but if you're interested in any of that, you can find me at those places.
I'm MacroBioBoi everywhere, and that's like even the everywhere that like only the Zoomers know and also only the Boomers know. So like that is on Facebook still. I got a
I, I
group
was gonna
or
ask,
whatever.
is there a Facebook?
There's a MacroBioBoi page somewhere. I've posted there within the past year, but like I mean like like Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. I stream on both of them, so like whatever platform you like better. I also post stuff on Twitter, and it's mostly just like I don't know, man. It's memes. It's memes and retweeting whatever Adam Fletcher said recently because you got to hear about it. But you can find me on everything. I probably will upload a TikTok again at some point. I have like 20 you can go watch there, and all the sound quality is really bad because I didn't have a good enough mic yet. But yeah, you can find me wherever you're gonna find me. I'll be this roughly looking dude over there.
Roughly, you're a handsome man. Just deal with it. Um, come on, guys. I think we're all looking good, and please sound off in the comments and let us know that we're right. Uh, in the meantime, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you guys. And let's close it out as we always do with a moo, moo, moo.
Moo 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 moo.
Moo 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 moo.